Today we take a look at the deadly cost of treating wild animals like family members. From a retired nurse who believed she could tame a violent chimpanzee to an environmental activist who thought her expertise made her safe with a mountain lion. But first, let's see the case where a woman adopted a chimpanzee but ended in a horrible death. It was October 14, 2016, and the afternoon sun filtered through the windows of a quiet suburban home in Bakersfield, California, where Sandra Whitmore had just finished preparing what would become her last meal with the creature she called her son. Sandra Whitmore, 51, had lived alone since her divorce 4 years earlier. A retired nurse who had spent 28 years in pediatric care, Sandra understood patience and routine. Her colleagues remembered her as someone who never gave up on difficult cases, often staying late to comfort sick children whose parents couldn't be there. Her 2 adult children had moved out of state for careers, leaving Sandra in a 4-bedroom house that felt increasingly empty. Phone calls with her daughter Emily in Portland and son Michael in Denver had become weekly obligations rather than genuine connections. The silence had become unbearable by 2014, leading Sandra to make a decision that would ultimately cost her her life. She adopted a 3-year-old chimpanzee named Charlie from a private exotic animal broker in Nevada. She kept Charlie hidden from authorities, avoiding veterinary care and outside contact to prevent discovery. Charlie arrived weighing 50 pounds, advertised as a sweet, hand-raised baby chimp. The broker provided falsified veterinary records and claimed Charlie had lived peacefully with a family in Las Vegas before they moved overseas. What the broker didn't mention, and what Sandra had access to but chose not to seek, was the well-documented reality that chimpanzees undergo a dramatic transformation as they mature. The information existed. Wildlife organizations, primate researchers, and even news coverage of previous chimp attacks had made the dangers widely known by 2016. Sandra simply never looked, and when fragments of that truth reached her through online forums or offhand comments from acquaintances, she dismissed them as exaggeration. Sandra treated Charlie exactly like a human child. She converted her spare bedroom into a nursery with children's furniture and toys. Charlie slept in a toddler bed, ate meals at the dining table using a high chair, and wore clothing Sandra picked out each morning from the children's section at department stores. For 2 years, the arrangement seemed perfect. Charlie was playful and affectionate, responding to commands and appearing to genuinely bond with Sandra. He learned to use the toilet, enjoyed watching cartoons, and seemed to understand simple conversations. But by early 2016, Charlie was approaching sexual maturity. He had grown to 110 pounds of solid muscle, developing a powerful chest and arms that bulged beneath his child-sized clothing. More concerning were the behavioral changes Sandra chose to ignore. Charlie became territorial, showing aggression toward visitors. He would scream and pound windows when strangers approached, sometimes hard enough to crack the glass. During outbursts, he tore furniture apart and broke dishes, behavior Sandra dismissed as tantrums rather than warning signs. She began making excuses to avoid having guests over, telling friends that Charlie was having a difficult phase. Online forums for chimpanzee owners reinforced her denial, framing the aggression as a phase that would pass. Sandra latched onto that narrative because it was easier than confronting what the behavior actually meant. The truth was available to anyone willing to look for it. Adult male chimpanzees are capable of overpowering an untrained adult human in close quarters, with jaw muscles powerful enough to crush bone and canine teeth over an inch long. In the wild, males establish dominance through displays of aggression that can turn lethal within seconds. Sandra had encountered this information before. She had chosen each time to look away. By October, Charlie weighed 115 pounds and had begun refusing to wear clothes, tearing them off whenever Sandra tried to dress him. Sandra had been dealing with a persistent kitchen faucet leak that week, calling repair services but hanging up when they asked about scheduling. She couldn't risk strangers seeing Charlie. On October 14th, Sandra was running late with his afternoon feeding after a lengthy phone call with Emily, who had been urging her mother to find normal companionship. Charlie was pacing his room, agitated and vocal, when Sandra entered just before 4 p.m., carrying his food tray, unaware she was walking into her final moments. Charlie attacked the moment she entered. He knocked the tray from her hands and grabbed her arm with crushing force. Sandra screamed, but her isolated home meant no neighbors could hear. Her nearest neighbor lived over half a mile away. The assault unfolded in violent bursts over a short span of time. Charlie lunging, retreating, then lunging again with renewed aggression. He bit her face repeatedly, his canine teeth causing severe lacerations. He targeted her hands when she tried to defend herself, severing multiple fingers and causing fractures to her wrist bones. At one point, Sandra managed to reach the doorframe, but Charlie pulled her back before she could get through. When Charlie finally stopped, Sandra lay motionless, surrounded by the toys she had chosen to make him feel loved. Charlie retreated to a corner, breathing heavily, covered in blood. He showed no signs of understanding the consequences, remaining agitated and alert, pacing the room as though the threat had not yet passed. Sandra died from blood loss sometime that afternoon, several hours before her daughter's friend discovered her body during a wellness check Emily had requested after being unable to reach her mother. Animal control officers sedated Charlie and removed him from the property. Following a mandatory evaluation period, wildlife authorities determined that a chimpanzee with a lethal attack history could not be safely housed or transferred. Charlie was euthanized. No sanctuary would accept him. The outcome was the one that primate experts had long warned was inevitable for animals kept in these conditions. Not a second chance, but a final consequence. Sandra's funeral was attended by family and friends, shocked that sweet Charlie could kill her. The tragedy became a stark reminder that love cannot change the fundamental nature of a wild animal, and that the warnings were always there for those willing to hear them. But even as Sandra's family mourned the woman who died believing she could domesticate the undomesticable, another animal lover was about to learn that years of wildlife expertise mean nothing when you're alone with a predator. It was June 9, 2015, on a red dirt track through Montana's wilderness, where the morning air carried the scent of pine and something far more dangerous than Rebecca Hayes could have imagined. Rebecca Hayes was a passionate wildlife advocate who had spent 15 years working with conservation organizations focused on mountain lion research programs in Montana. An environmental science graduate from the University of Montana, Rebecca had participated in numerous field studies to track cougar populations, document territorial behavior, and educate the public about mountain lion ecology. She believed deeply that mountain lions were misunderstood creatures, unfairly demonized by ranchers and hunters, and that humans could coexist peacefully with them if given proper education and respect. In January 2014, Rebecca received a call that would ultimately seal her fate. A wildlife rehabilitation center in Idaho had found a 4-month-old male mountain lion cub, orphaned after his mother was killed by wildlife officials following a series of livestock attacks. The cub was too young to survive in the wild, and the rehabilitation center lacked the permits and space for long-term care. What followed was not a clean, sanctioned transfer. It was the kind of arrangement that exists in the gray zones of wildlife management, informal, undocumented, and built on the assumption that Rebecca's experience made the rules negotiable. She took the cub without proper authorization, operating under expired rehabilitation credentials she had never renewed, telling herself that her 15 years in the field qualified her where paperwork did not. Rebecca named the mountain lion Shadow, after its tawny coat and piercing amber eyes. For the first year, Shadow seemed entirely manageable. He was playful, bonded with Rebecca, and showed typical kitten behaviors that reinforced her belief that mountain lions were simply misunderstood cats. Rebecca built a large outdoor enclosure with 10-foot chain-link fencing and spent hours each day socializing with Shadow, playing with toys, and hand-feeding him raw meat. But as Shadow matured, his wild instincts began to emerge with increasing intensity. By his second year, Shadow weighed 95 pounds of lean muscle and stood nearly 3 feet at the shoulder. He began testing the fence boundaries systematically, climbing and attempting to escape. He became increasingly food aggressive, snarling and showing teeth when Rebecca approached during meals. Most concerning, he showed an intense predatory focus on her neighbor's livestock, chickens and goats visible through the fence line, behavior that should have alarmed Rebecca, but which she interpreted as natural curiosity. State wildlife authorities had taken notice. Officers visited her property twice in the months before the attack, citing permit violations and issuing formal warnings that her possession of Shadow was illegal and that direct contact with the animal was prohibited. Rebecca did not dispute the citations. She simply continued her routine, convinced that the authorities were applying rules designed for irresponsible owners to someone who actually understood these animals. She had heard the warnings directly from the people whose job it was to enforce them, and she had decided they did not apply to her. By June 2015, Shadow was 18 months old and approaching full maturity. He had grown to 120 pounds with powerful jaws and a muscular frame built for taking down large prey. Mountain lions are apex predators with substantial bite force and razor-sharp claws designed for gripping prey. They kill through precision strikes to the throat and neck, using their full body weight to pin prey while their jaws crush the trachea and sever major blood vessels. Unlike domestic cats, mountain lions retain intense predatory instincts that thousands of years of evolution have hardwired for survival. Shadow's behavior had become increasingly erratic in the weeks leading up to June 9th, pacing the fence line for hours, vocalizing at night with calls that carried for miles, and refusing to make eye contact with Rebecca during their sessions, a behavioral shift that experienced wildlife handlers recognize as a sign of mounting stress and unpredictability. On June 9th, Rebecca entered Shadow's enclosure for their daily 4 p.m. interaction session, a routine she had maintained despite the formal warnings she had received. That afternoon, something was fundamentally different. Shadow didn't approach when Rebecca entered the enclosure. Instead, he remained at the far end, watching her with an intensity she had never seen before. His body was low to the ground, ears pinned back, and his amber eyes never left her face. Rebecca later told investigators she felt genuinely uneasy, but convinced herself Shadow was simply having an off day. Rebecca sat on a wooden bench in the center of the enclosure, holding Shadow's favorite treats, chunks of fresh venison she had specially ordered. She called to him softly, using the same voice she had used since he was a cub. Shadow began walking toward her with deliberate, measured steps, body low, ears flat, eyes locked and unblinking. It was the same posture she had studied in field reports, the same posture documented in attack case files she had reviewed during her years of research. She extended her hand with the treats anyway, believing she could still reach him. Shadow lunged, exactly as his posture had been signaling. He covered the 15 feet between them in under 2 seconds, claws extended, his powerful body striking Rebecca with crushing force and knocking her backward off the bench. She screamed and tried to push him away, but Shadow's jaws clamped onto her throat with devastating precision. When Rebecca fought back, striking Shadow's face with her hands, it triggered his full predatory response. Shadow's canine teeth caused severe trauma to her neck, including major blood vessels. Blood sprayed across the enclosure's dirt floor. Rebecca's screams turned to wet, gurgling sounds as her airway collapsed under the pressure. Shadow maintained his grip on her throat for less than a minute, long enough to ensure she was completely neutralized. When he finally released, Rebecca was still alive but unable to breathe, blood pouring from the massive wound in her neck. Shadow stepped back and remained nearby, alert and focused. She tried crawling toward the enclosure gate 20 feet away, leaving a trail of blood in the dirt. She made it less than 6 feet before collapsing face down, her body going still. Rebecca's neighbor, Tom Patterson, heard her screams from his property 200 yards away. He ran toward Rebecca's home and saw Shadow through the chain-link fence, standing over what appeared to be a human body. He immediately called 911 from his cell phone. Sheriff's deputies and paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, but couldn't enter the enclosure while Shadow remained inside. Local wildlife authorities were contacted and dispatched an officer with tranquilizer equipment. Shadow was successfully sedated and collapsed, allowing emergency responders to finally reach Rebecca. She was dead. The medical examiner determined she had suffered catastrophic trauma to her throat and neck, including damage to major blood vessels and crushing of her trachea. She had lost consciousness within minutes of the initial attack and died from blood loss and asphyxiation shortly thereafter. Shadow was held by wildlife authorities pending a formal investigation into the circumstances of his acquisition and housing. Within days, officials confirmed what the citations had already established. Shadow had never been legally in Rebecca's possession. He was euthanized. There was no ambiguity in the outcome, and no institution willing to take on an apex predator with a human fatality on record. Montana legislators strengthened wildlife possession laws in 2016, requiring mandatory inspections and prohibiting direct contact between handlers and large predators. Rebecca's tragedy served as a stark reminder that understanding mountain lion ecology doesn't mean they can be treated as pets, and that expertise, real or imagined, is not a substitute for the boundaries that exist to keep both humans and animals alive. Yet, as Montana's wilderness reclaimed the silence where Rebecca's screams had echoed, a social media influencer in Miami's urban sprawl was about to discover that some creatures are even more dangerous when they appear completely calm. It was March 3, 2017, and by evening, the air conditioning hummed steadily through Marcus de Leon's Miami condo, where the temperature-controlled environment had been carefully maintained for the massive predator that would soon wrap itself around his neck for the final time. Marcus de Leon, 33, had built his online presence around one simple concept: living dangerously looked good on camera. A social media influencer with over 250,000 Instagram followers, Marcus specialized in exotic lifestyle content that pushed boundaries and generated engagement. His feed featured luxury cars, designer fashion, expensive watches, and increasingly dangerous exotic pets that projected wealth and fearlessness to his audience. Marcus saw exotic animals as the ultimate status symbols, living accessories that generated sponsorship opportunities and viral content that translated directly into revenue. In February 2016, Marcus purchased what would become both his signature creature and his executioner, a Burmese python he named Titan. Marcus acquired Titan from a reptile breeder in Homestead, Florida, paying $3,200. Titan was already 12 feet long and 80 pounds when Marcus brought him home, but Burmese pythons are among the largest snake species on Earth, capable of reaching lengths exceeding 20 feet and weights over 200 pounds.
Marcus kept Titan in a custom glass enclosure in his Miami condo, initially adequate for a 12-foot snake, but increasingly cramped as Titan grew at an alarming rate. Over 13 months, Titan added 6 feet in length and 70 pounds in weight, transforming from a manageable pet into an apex predator weighing 150 pounds of pure muscle. Marcus's enclosure was rated for snakes up to 14 feet, but he kept postponing the expensive upgrade, prioritizing content creation and his social media schedule over animal welfare and basic safety. Marcus's Instagram posts frequently showed him draping Titan across his shoulders like a living scarf, posing shirtless with the massive snake coiled around his torso, or hand-feeding Titan large rats and rabbits while the camera captured every moment. Reptile experts who discovered these posts consistently warned Marcus in the comments that his handling methods were extremely dangerous, particularly feeding Titan in the same room where Marcus slept and handling the snake alone, without a second person present in case of an emergency. Marcus dismissed these warnings with the arrogance that would ultimately kill him. He responded to concerned comments with laughing emojis and dismissive replies, stating that the experts were jealous haters. Marcus genuinely believed his bond with Titan made him safe, a common delusion among exotic pet owners who mistake familiarity for protection from animals driven purely by primitive instinct. The warning signs had been escalating for months. Titan had become increasingly active during feeding times, showing heightened interest in Marcus's movements. The snake had also begun what herpetologists call testing behavior, tightening his coils incrementally as he draped himself across Marcus's body, responding to physical pressure and movement. Marcus interpreted this as affection rather than instinctive assessment. On March 3rd, Marcus was preparing content for a sponsored post promoting a protein supplement company. His concept involved photographing himself working out in his home gym with Titan draped across his shoulders. Beast mode imagery designed to go viral and showcase the supplement's connection to raw power and dominance. He had executed similar shoots without incident before, which only reinforced his dangerous overconfidence. Marcus removed Titan from his enclosure around 7:30 p.m. Marcus typically fed Titan every 2 weeks, and the last feeding had been 16 days prior. A snake that has not eaten recently is more reactive, more attuned to movement, more likely to respond to physical resistance with tightening. In an enclosed space, with a handler moving and flexing, the conditions were precisely wrong. Marcus's home gym was a converted spare bedroom, approximately 12 feet by 14 feet, equipped with weight machines, mirrors, and padded flooring. The confined space would prove fatal. Marcus set up his camera on a tripod, configured it to take timed shots every 10 seconds, and positioned himself in front of the mirror with Titan's 150 pounds of muscle distributed across his neck and upper back. Burmese pythons are constrictors, meaning they cause rapid circulatory collapse by restricting blood flow. They respond to movement and physical resistance by tightening their grip, not out of aggression, but out of reflex. The coils contract in response to pressure changes, and the more the prey struggles, the more the snake tightens. Unlike venomous snakes that inject toxins, constrictors rely on overwhelming physical pressure, making escape extremely difficult to overcome without assistance. Marcus began posing for the camera, flexing his arms and adjusting his stance for optimal angles. Titan shifted position as Marcus moved, the snake's body sliding slightly forward as his coils naturally adjusted around Marcus's neck and torso. This was instinctive behavior. Pythons constantly test their grip when draped on objects, seeking the most secure position. At approximately 7:43 p.m., Titan's coils suddenly tightened around Marcus's throat. The constriction was triggered by Marcus's movement and the physical resistance of his muscles as he flexed, combined with the snake's heightened reactivity from not having eaten recently. To Titan's nervous system, the shifting pressure and resistance registered as instability, and the reflex response was to grip harder. Marcus immediately tried to pull Titan's coils away from his neck, but this was the worst possible response. Every movement, every push, every attempt to pry the coils loose only signaled the snake to tighten further. Titan responded by constricting more, his muscular coils contracting like a living vice around Marcus's throat and chest. Marcus couldn't scream. His airway was already compressed to the point where vocalization was impossible. He used both hands to try to unwrap Titan's coils, but the compression was extremely difficult to overcome without assistance. Marcus stumbled backward, hitting the mirrored wall, then fell to the padded floor with Titan still wrapped around him. Even then, he kept fighting, one hand clawing at the coils, the other slapping the floor as though trying to signal someone who wasn't there. Titan's coils now encircled Marcus's chest and neck completely, cutting off both air and blood flow. The constriction prevented circulation from reaching his brain. This is precisely how constrictors kill, not by crushing bones or suffocating in the traditional sense, but by causing rapid circulatory collapse that deprives the brain of oxygen. Unconsciousness typically follows within 1 to 3 minutes, depending on the degree of compression, as blood pressure crashes and organs stop receiving oxygen. Marcus's camera continued taking timed photographs every 10 seconds, documenting his death in horrifying detail. The images, later recovered by investigators, showed Marcus's face turning red, then purple as oxygen deprivation set in. His eyes bulged from the pressure, and his hands desperately clawed at Titan's coils in increasingly weak attempts to free himself. The final photos showed his body going limp as consciousness faded, and eventually, Titan slowly unwrapped after Marcus had been motionless for several minutes. Marcus lost consciousness around 7:45 p.m., roughly 1 to 2 minutes after Titan began constricting in earnest. Unconsciousness came first, followed by fatal oxygen deprivation as his brain was starved of blood flow. Titan, sensing no further movement or resistance, gradually unwrapped and slithered off Marcus's body. The snake showed no feeding response after the constriction. He simply moved to a corner of the room and coiled up to rest after the exertion. Marcus's body was discovered at 10:35 p.m. when his girlfriend, Valerie Santos, arrived at his condo for a planned dinner date. She had a key and let herself in, calling out for Marcus when she received no response. She began searching the condo systematically and found him in the gym, lying face up on the floor, with Titan coiled peacefully in the corner, approximately 6 feet away. Valerie screamed and ran from the condo, calling 911 from the hallway while hyperventilating. Police and paramedics arrived within 7 minutes, but officers confirmed Marcus was deceased and immediately called Miami-Dade Fire Rescue's specialized exotic animal team to handle Titan's safe removal. Titan was captured without incident, using professional snake hooks, and transported to a licensed reptile rescue facility. The python showed no aggression toward the handlers. He had simply done what constrictors do when presented with sustained movement and resistance. The medical examiner determined Marcus died from cardiac arrest caused by circulatory cutoff. His blood flow had been stopped to the point where his brain was deprived of oxygen, leading to unconsciousness and cardiac arrest. Local wildlife investigators determined that Marcus had been keeping Titan legally. Florida allows ownership of Burmese pythons with proper permits, which Marcus possessed. However, investigators noted multiple safety violations: inadequate enclosure size relative to the snake's actual dimensions, solo handling of a snake that exceeded safe parameters, and a feeding schedule that posed an elevated risk. Marcus's death received significant media attention, partly because his camera had inadvertently documented the timeline of his final moments. His social media accounts were deactivated by his family, and the images that caught the incident were not released to the public out of respect to the family. Titan was placed at a licensed reptile sanctuary in Central Florida, where he lives in a habitat appropriate for his size. The sanctuary now uses Marcus's case in educational programs about the dangers of keeping giant constrictors as pets.